Hey guys, if you can think about how you found this podcast, maybe it's on Instagram or TikTok, maybe someone shared it with you. I don't run ads for the show or have sponsorships, so the only way this grows is through word of mouth. If this was valuable for you in any way, my only ask is if you could share this with someone who you think would help their investing journey or business. Thanks a lot, and let's get to the episode. Welcome to SDR Like the Best. I'm your host, Michael Chang. It's my great pleasure to welcome Marcus Räder from Hostaway. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for this conversation. Marcus, last time I spoke with Marcus was in the depths of COVID in March 2020, a customer of Hostaway, and we were talking before the show. It's been a crazy journey in the last 3 years, so excited to talk and dig into what's happened over this time period. But Marcus, may I give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. So my name is Marcus Räder. I'm commonly known as Marcus from Hostaway. If you ever visit a short-term rental conference, you might have seen me roaming around the halls with long blonde hair and with a Metallica t-shirt or maybe a Blue Jays baseball hat. And I'm the co-founder and CEO at Hostaway. We have very quickly risen to the top of the PMS world. We Just last week, I saw we took the second spot on Capterra. We have 600 reviews there, and we're out of the ones with more than 500, we have the highest average review score. So we have thousands of property managers using us around the world, and yeah, quite a lot of data and insights to derive from that.
Perfect. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've personally been a Hostaway customer for the last 3.5 years, and not being paid to say this or anything, just like I'm a huge fan of the platform, and I love talking. And I think the property management system is such an important piece of your technology stack as a short-term rental operator, and you really need to have that. You build that foundation correctly in the beginning to scale. And then we're going to hit on these points. But Marcus, the way I start is: do you have a good short-term rental story as an operator, or from your view as a technology provider, a good story to share with the folks?
Yeah, actually, I moved to Canada 8 years ago, and I spent a large amount of time of my life in Finland, and that's where saunas come from. And I wanted to build a sauna, but it turned out it was unpractical here in downtown Toronto. So I bought a cottage and built a sauna there, but then eventually realized I'm not using the cottage too much, so I started renting it out.
Okay.
Now the challenge is I had the title, it was perfect, it was rustic, which basically means worn down. That's
Okay.
the keyword for worn down on Airbnb. And I had lovely guests. I became a super host in no time, always 5-star reviews. But then there was this one guy, and I made it very clear. I took even the pictures that I took, I made them look bad on Airbnb just to make sure that I don't end up with someone expecting a mansion, because this was really like the cheapest house you can find anywhere, and it was in pretty bad shape, to be honest. And one guest, he called me on a Saturday night, and he was screaming at me and saying, "Oh my God, this is terrible. It smells so bad. There's not even air conditioning. Everything is just terrible here. There's flies and mosquitoes." And I said, "Yeah, that's what it's like on the countryside. That's what it's like in the description. So what can I do for you? Check the reviews. Everyone else be happy." And he kept screaming and screaming. And then eventually he quieted down, and he started whispering to me, and he said, "Okay, I made this really big mistake. I got my whole family, and especially my mother-in-law here. I promised them a great week at a cottage, and in their minds, they thought I was renting out an entire mansion with a swimming pool and everything. And now we come to this old house, and now I realize that you advertised an old house on the countryside, and that's exactly what we got. But that's not what my mother-in-law was expecting." And it was just, when you read these stories about all the guests who are unhappy, there's always a story behind that. And it made me realize that we're not an Airbnb host and an Airbnb guest. We're just human beings. And he was having a hard time impressing his mother-in-law and just wanted to have a good time. The mother-in-law ended up staying at a hotel.
Yeah.
And I didn't end up having to refund anything, but I was just happy that I was able to level with him and understand his pressures, because his pressures had nothing to do with my property. Although, to be fair, all of his complaints were correct. Yes, there were flies in there, because that's what happens when you keep the door open.
Yeah. No, he probably was doing it just to show to his mother-in-law that he was taking charge. But yeah, no, that's a very important constituent to get right on vacation, especially when you're in laws. But that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And it's good that you have that hosting experience before, or maybe it was before you built a platform. But maybe take a minute or so. Tell us the the start of Hostaway, right? First off, like why Hostaway? Why the name? Actually, I'm actually curious on that. Why Hostaway?
That's a very rare question. I think host away can mean two things. First of all, you could be away while hosting,
Okay.
or you could just go ahead, host away
Wait.
all you
Okay.
want. But, and I coach and I mentor a lot of startups, and they ask me about the name. And I said, look, it doesn't matter really what your name is. What matters is you got to check the domains. So I was running a bunch of different combinations. I think I was using Excel. Today I would use ChatGPT for that, just to
Yeah.
run different combinations on different words that are relevant to the industry, combined with other words that might make good. And I found out Hostaway, but that was taken. But then Hostaways with an S was the best I could come up with
Okay.
at my budget, which was 19 cents to buy the domain name. And then when we got our first investor on board, they said, look, the domain hostaway.com is for sale for 3,000. So
Okay.
we gotta buy it.
Nice.
That's one of the terms of the investment. So that's why we're Hostaway. It's
Okay.
really,
Okay.
there was no plan whatsoever. It's just random words on a spreadsheet just to find an available domain. And even then, we
So
actually
yeah, great point. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. It lagged a little bit. I think that's a great point about just starting. I think a lot of people, especially in Airbnb business, you do a lot of analysis paralysis where you do all the work, but you actually never start. So even if you don't get the perfect name, where it's Hostaway or Hostaways, like if you build a great product and then you eventually it's in the market, it's good, people invest in you, then you can go back and correct the things that you want to do in the beginning. But thanks for sharing that story. How there's a lot of different technology products to build, right? How did you triangulate on building a property management system for the short-term rental space?
I've never worked in the real estate or in the travel or hospitality business before this. I have, however, worked in many technology companies. And the same goes for my other founders. There's three of us in total. We have all a lot of experience in building technology based businesses. But my passion has always been real estate. And it was in 2015 when I realized that, hey, I think there's something here. I think there's a shift in the way people are not only traveling, but actually living. And there is probably not many who are capitalizing on what that will mean for technology. So I started researching the market, and what that looked like in practice was I was in downtown Toronto and I had a couple of ideas of Airbnb and what it's doing, how the business is doing. But what really surprised me was the amount of property managers that were
Mm-hmm.
managing 5, not 10, 40 or 100 properties. And I interviewed them. I made a list of 40 and I
Oh,
managed to
wow. Okay.
interview all 40. And I'm very thankful for that. And I asked them very open ended questions. Okay, why did you get started? And what is your dream? And where are you today? And what's your biggest challenge? What I was very happy to find out was that a lot of them mentioned that they want to grow bigger, but their main challenge is lack of technology. And then when I started researching the market, I found out why that is. Because while there was a lot of technology then, and there even is a lot of technology today, a lot of actually at the time, and probably even today, most of those technology companies in the short-term rental or vacation rental space were founded by people who were in the short-term rental space. Now, what that meant was that they had built a product for themselves and then started selling it to others. The challenge with this space, and actually any other space in the world, any industry in the world, is that there are differences. What works for Toyota is not going to work for Ford. And as a result of that, when we did our analysis, we found out that there's a lot of products out there, but they're basically 100 products built for 100 different businesses. So there's
Mm-hmm.
10,000 businesses out there. Nobody has built a product for them. And that's when we got really excited, and we were able to tell investors this story too, that hey, look, there's not a single technology based company here. There are companies selling technology, but they're not experts in technology. And that's how we started building it.
So let's unpack that a little bit. Okay, 40 interviews, 40 operators, finding a common denominator. Okay, but what does that actually mean though? What does that mean from a? Can you give like a more tangible example of like how that impacted the way that you've built the technology? Maybe in the beginning, where if it's messaging or the user interface, or what decisions did you make differently versus if you were someone like you said, the other 100 companies that built something internally and then start selling it externally.
Yeah, to give one example, the OTA distribution back then, as it is today, is wildly different depending on where you're located and what type of properties you have.
Okay.
For example, at the time, if you had small condos near the business districts in a big city, the number one place, 80% of your bookings came from booking.com. You couldn't get anything on Airbnb. Nobody would use Airbnb for that. Because with Airbnb, you travel with a bigger group. You don't want a one-bedroom condo. And you definitely don't want to be next to the office of a big bank. That doesn't sound like a great weekend getaway. But if you're a business traveler, you call your internal travel team and they go on booking.com and they find something and they happen to find one right next to the client that you're visiting. Perfect. And then I think the easiest challenge that we found to solve there, which turned out to be actually impossible to solve, was just getting the calendars synchronized. So we didn't start by building a PMS. We didn't have a big vision for we're going to do an all-in-one best-in-class solution like we have today. No, it was just a simple problem that you have rates and availability, but they're not the same across channels, and you get double bookings. That was the major problem. And there were lots of solutions for that, but they all had their own limitations, mostly because they were built for one use case. So, for example, you could find a great system, but it didn't support Airbnb, or another great system that didn't support Booking.com. Or let's say a good system, but that supported everything, but you couldn't set the minimum number of nights because you want the minimum number of nights during the weekend to be, for example, 3, but during the week to be 2.
Yeah. It's funny you said that. It's funny you say that, actually. It was actually the big reason why. So we were on a different technology platform before we moved to Hostaway in November of 2019. And that was actually the biggest thing. That was the biggest part of the analysis, was how wide a distribution can we get and how good the quality of the connection was, and the length of stay restriction just being one. Double booking is the worst problem because you're going to get eviscerated by your OTAs. It's and it's bad for the guests too. So it's actually great to hear that was what you focused on in the beginning, and that for me, and I think a lot of the people I've spoken with, that was a big piece of the initial decision to use you guys. And then, so you started off with that. And so how did you think was there like a broader roadmap of what you wanted to build, and you just kind of started with the kind of the channel management part in the beginning? Maybe just talk a little bit about the overall product vision and how you got from where you began. And I want to talk about COVID too, of course, but how did you think about that product map?
So this is
when you started the company?
Where I think the experience from previous companies came to place, because we have worked in both successful and in unsuccessful companies. And quite often technology companies, when they start out, the idea is not that relevant. And the initial product and value proposition, it's not that relevant. What's relevant is to get moving, is to get something through the door and then reiterate. And early stage companies often fail because they stuck on that idea. They have an idea and they just believe in that and they want to make that work. That's probably not going to get you a company. What you need to do is just accept that your idea may be the way you can find the next idea and then the next one until one of them works. Then the other thing that once a company gets actually going, when they find an idea that somewhat works, then they start doing all of this stuff. And that's where everything goes wrong. Do one thing and do it well. That's the secret success of most successful technology companies, like Google. Today they do everything, but the first 10 years they spent on building just the best search engine for the web. Just one thing, just the best search engine in the world, nothing else. And that's important to keep in mind, that you don't get Rome wasn't built in a day, and we decided to just build the best channel manager there is.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's
Everything else followed later on. And actually, what has happened in the last few years has been really interesting, because when we started out, there wasn't an ecosystem set out the way today you can check who are the companies in the space. But back then, it wasn't clear how the space was even divided. So we had a channel manager, but then there were other companies that had PMSs, and these were two separate systems. And this is how it works in hotels still today. You have one software that manages your distribution, and another software that manages your property or the in-house staff. And those two systems communicate with each other. This is the way it was in vacation rentals as well. But what happened over the years is that only one of them could survive. And what happened to survive was the all-in-one PMS and channel manager solution.
Yeah, we have about 30 properties, and there's a small business. There's no way to support a bunch of different platforms. You find one that really works, and then you just like really get your team trained on it and get good at it. But I want to get back to that point about being good at one thing and really focusing on that. And I think that's one thing that I see. There's one common issue I see with a lot of vacation rental operators, and I always counsel people to just be very focused on one market or one type of layout, like just one thing that you do really well, and just continue to get really good at it, because that in the end is going to de-risk you from market volatility or things that happen, because you really know your market well, and you're not spread out over 3 or 4 different things where something bad happens. Like, you don't have the management bandwidth to handle those issues and react quickly. And that's where I see a lot of people actually fail, and some of these very large vacation rental operators having issues, because you're spread out over so many different markets. And it's just really hard to do a lot of things at a high level. You get one thing done really well, and then you branch out from there. But having that core is really important. And it's interesting that you've taken this philosophy in building the technology product into one of there's 2 real PMS platform choices of today, and Hostaway definitely is one of them. I'm going to talk about COVID, and that's where you and I had our first conversation. That wasn't. It was very scary on the host side, right? It was March 15th, I think, and then you had a thriving business with a full calendar, and then 2 days later, you had a bunch of liability and no revenue. And it was a very interesting time, very scary time for everyone. Some of us were able to survive and thrive thereafter. Some of us didn't, and it was a tough time. I think for technology companies as well, right? Supporting that ecosystem. I guess as you're seeing all this data on your end and then seeing what's happening, how was it like on your side, like building a technology company where this was your customer base and all their revenue went away?
Yeah, really good question. First of all, I think technology companies, just like property managers, there's 2 sides of the business. One is, let's say, the product. In our case, maybe not necessarily the software, but let's say you as a valued user or someone who leaves us reviews, or hundreds of people who leave us reviews. That's the product. But the other side that people don't see is the financials behind it. And it's the same thing with a property manager. You can go into a vacation home and you can say, wow, this looks nice. But you have no idea whether they're able to pay the mortgage or not, or whether if they have the reserves or use trust accounting. You have absolutely no idea. So what actually happened to us during COVID was that we were growing really well just before COVID. And we decided to hit the gas, which meant we decided to spend more money than we have, because we were so sure that we were going to be able to raise capital. And we did that. And we were planning on finishing the fundraising in May 2020, which would be the same time when you run out of money. But then in February and March, suddenly it was like the wings were cut off and we just crashed, because it was the worst possible timing for us, because we had planned it so that we would run out of money in May, which would be fine because our business was growing so much. But it's not fine if the entire industry goes down under. And as a result of that, we had to make some really drastic measures. We had to let people go. And it was just bad luck from us. Had it happened 1 year earlier, we would have maybe not have to let anyone go. But there was I think a lot of people think back on the time as a clear timeline. They remember what they did in February, March, and April, and they remember what they did the next winter and the winter thereafter. But what many have seemed to forgotten is that the uncertainty of that timeline, it was so uncertain at the time. And I remember even in February, people were discussing, even big companies like Airbnb and Booking.com, before they went out, they were discussing, is this a thing or is it not? And there was this uncertainty until that one weekend when Airbnb canceled all the bookings, and then everyone could say, okay, this is a thing, this is a real thing. But before that, we had a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
We were seriously worried because bookings were also going down before that. It wasn't that Airbnb canceled, it was that people were unsure. But we realized that we can't really sell. There's no point in developing the product right now. What we need to do is focus on our customers. But we couldn't really work with our customers the way we normally do, improve the product based on their feedback, because their businesses had changed fundamentally. And I realized that this is a unique opportunity because we are in the same boat. Our company's going under, but our customers, they're going under. We had hundreds of customers just sending a message and saying, hey, my money is out. It took me 2 weeks, my business is over. And I realized that I need to now dedicate my time only talking to these people, because everything that I built in Hostaway, I didn't build it for myself. I didn't build it for my family to be proud of me, like my Airbnb big guest who wanted to impress his mother-in-law. No, it's built for the customers. Like, these are the very people that we built this for. And now they're all leaving because they're not in business anymore.
Yeah.
And we got so many requests and so many questions because they couldn't pay the bills, which is very understandable. But at the same time, the amount of customer support tickets that we got in was substantially lower, because if you have no reservations, you have no problems. My father always used to say, if you have no money, you have no troubles. That's very similar.
Yeah.
So I told the entire support and customer success team that, hey, what you got to do now is focus on my calendar. I canceled every other meeting. I want every single customer in here with a spot so that I get to talk to them. And then I got to talk to them. It took actually 3 months. I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people. And there were some really sad stories. We had a tough time, but our company didn't go under. But many people, actually, their family business that they inherited, it was gone because of the financials behind it. And many people had leveraged themselves. Many people had taken debt, and it was gone. Others were struggling, and they didn't know if it was going to survive or not. And but what really happened there was that I was able to start seeing patterns. I was able to start connecting the dots and seeing where and what type of customers have the highest likelihood of succeeding. And we
Can I pause you there for a moment? So 3 months is a lot when you're in the depths of COVID. I guess everyone, if everyone's sitting at home, I guess it's a good time to do a bunch of Zoom calls with your customers. But no, it was a very stressful time. And just for us, we had to make a lot of decisions on what properties we had to exit. We're like, look, there's just no way to. We have properties in New York, and the rents are so high. Even if it comes back 4 months from now, we're not going to make money for 2 years. What's the point of keeping this on? We need to just make decisions, right? So I think a lot of people are going through some really tough times there. And I remember our call together, and it was you and others in the industry too, just like understanding the situation and finding ways to work with their customer base, so that I think fundamentally it was like, let's try to survive as long as possible. Like, travel is, people have been traveling for hundreds of thousands of years. People have been traveling for thousands of years, right? Through war, through famine, through whatever it is, right? I remember my wife and I having this conversation. Eventually it will come back, and there's going to be fewer people that are going to be there than when it started. So let's be one of those fewer people, because if we're there, and then we can position ourselves to be successful. And I think luckily it was only a few months, because if it was like a few years, like I think it would have been a much different story, or a year would have been a different story. But I think on that point where you talked about, and I think I'm very curious. So what common factors did you see through your conversations? So, okay, these are the kind of customers that have a higher likelihood to make it through the end of this period.
So we saw interesting things in different markets. So, for example, what we saw in Australia was super interesting because they basically had because of their geography, they have no direct communication with the rest of the world. You got to get on an 8-hour flight to get anywhere at all outside of
Yep.
Australia, except maybe New Zealand. But what we saw there was that if the restrictions lift, then people are definitely willing to travel. For example, when they called their guests and asked, "Hey, I'll give you a travel credit," and they said, "Yeah, we'd like to come any other time." Whereas in many other
Got it.
markets, guests just wanted their money back, and they said, "We don't know, we just need our money."
Yeah.
So that was a good sign that they have an internal market, which turned out to be very true. Actually, their vacation rentals did really well despite a complete lack of
Interesting.
tourists, simply because internally they have high-end properties, but they also have a lot of people who can afford to rent those. But this opposite happened in many European markets. There's two very big markets that rely on mostly American tourism. One of them is Italy, and the other one is Ireland. Sure, Europeans go to Italy too, and they go to Ireland too, but the ones who go there to spend money, that's the Americans. And they were
Gotcha.
not coming. And they didn't keep coming for at least 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So what we saw on the other hand in Europe was that there were completely new markets for us that were thriving. For example, campsites that were within one country. And it could be a small country. Take Luxembourg, take maybe, or a small area like southern France. And one second here.
No worries. We're getting the
Sorry,
tour
my
of
neighbor
Casa de
my
Rey.
neighbor decided to cut the lawn. He got bored. So
No worries at all.
I hope we can cut this off. Yeah, so that's what we saw in Europe, and then what we saw in Canada and the US, we saw that the East Coast was much better off than the
Yeah.
West Coast, probably because of the distances. On the East Coast, you can travel. I'm in Toronto. I can take a 3-hour flight to Florida.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in Texas, you're going to be quite far away from everything. And but then at the same time, for example, we saw that Florida is a massive market that's going to thrive really well. As I'm sure with your experience in New York, you saw the same thing. People went to Florida.
Yeah, if you're in Florida. Yeah, like just the geographic yeah, and then now you're saying we were lucky that all of our inventory was East Coast. New York was tough though. New York was a hard shutdown. But I guess the just to zoom out, being able to talk to getting that real time feedback from your customers and knowing like what is wrong or what is right and what is wrong and being able to course correct quickly is something that had a really big impact on your business. And even on the Airbnb side, right? Having your inventory out there and really actually when you're running your business, looking at the reviews and looking at the messages and trying to see what actually is wrong, what's right and what's wrong. There are things that you're seeing that are always wrong. Just fix that, and then you'll solve or like disclose that. If you can't fix it, it's going to solve a lot of your problems. We had some apartments in Philadelphia along a main street, and during the summer, it's very loud all times of day. And we saw that, and we just disclosed that on the listing to people, and then they're like, okay, we actually never got complaints anymore because they just knew. And also, where things are going right, I think people forget this too. They're like, oh, okay, I really like this feature. I really like this location. I really like this something. Like, oh, okay, it rings a bell in your head. Like, okay, next time I go buy more properties or rent more properties, like this is the type of inventory I want because people like that and it's booking higher. And I think that's where it's like a really big, and I think this is where like having a good technology platform, like having a good property management system, but also having good accounting, where we at a very early time, we integrated our accounting and made sure that was right. Because then you can get real numbers, right? What's really bad is like not having a good accounting system where you might think of something and you look at your numbers and you have to like do all this work to try to figure out if it actually is profitable or not. But if you have good data and you're able to look at your data and get insights quickly, it really helps you optimize your business and really speeds up that process. You can't take a week to make a decision, right? If you can figure out something like an hour and then execute on that, whether it's good or bad, like you'll get that feedback right away and you can just iterate. And that's what's super helpful for us. And I think from a Hostaway side, just being able to download all the data, it's being very consistent and being able to run our analysis on that has been really helpful for us. And also just telling my experience on the product, having the Stripe integration or having the payments integration being not messing up some of my other experiences, like just having like good, consistent getting paid for your customer stays. It sounds like a very trivial thing, but it's actually like the most essential part is if they're stayed there, you got to make sure they pay you and you collect the money. And then being able to account for that properly. That's been, I think those are like some really important points when people are looking at a technology platform. One, it works, and two is like you're getting good data from it so that you can actually run some analytics and be able to make good business decisions.
That's right. You touched on a very important point there to look at your reviews, but I'll take that one step further. I think what we did during the beginning of the pandemic and the decisions that we made, in hindsight, it all makes sense. Okay, Italy is not going to be a good market, and it turned out that Italy was basically closed for tourism for 2 years. Even after they opened, nobody wanted to come. And in hindsight, Florida was great because they had no restrictions and everything was free, and they also had sunshine and beaches, and everyone wanted to go there. But it's worth keeping in mind that not everyone drew these same conclusions, and many companies decided the exact opposite, and many of them are gone today. Yeah. And I think that the key difference there is how you look at the data, because if a guest review, you mentioned location, sometimes you see a property where people say that the location wasn't the best. Well, there's something else behind that, and you can't find it out based on the review because the number will just show that the location is a bit worse. But here's the thing, guests will not leave a bad review about the location or about anything at all unless something is wrong. But what is it that's wrong? You won't know unless you talk to the guests. And it was the same for us. We saw something was wrong. We saw there were no bookings, but how did we know where the light at the end of the tunnel was? Yeah. We would never have known if we had just relied on data. We had to talk one-on-one to people and then see if we can see the patterns.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. For us, it's like reading guest communication and, having your team go through that and just understand that. And also to talking to your customers if they have an issue. Hey, how's your stay going so far? What did you like? What are you liking about it? What don't you like about it? And then just be able to collect that information. I think for us, especially the properties, we have ones that we rent and then re-rent, rental arbitrage. We have some that we own as well. Especially the ones that we own, we very much ask, hey, what's good, what's bad? Because obviously we own the asset. So we want to make sure that people like it and that we're buying stuff that people like. And if there's problems, we're fixing that.
Yeah, I actually have an example of that. There was a former customer of ours where I ended up staying in one of their places. Okay. I wasn't actually staying there, but I was renting it for a colleague that was flying into town. And I took one with bad reviews because what was interesting was that every guest had a different reason why the place was bad.
Okay.
So I thought, I really need to see this. And when I got there, I found out that basically all of those reviews were wrong, because one said the location was bad, but the location was actually really good. And another one said it's noisy, but yeah, it's to be expected. It's in a wild area. And some reviews complained about silly things like not enough toilet paper or other things. So I found out what was wrong there that nobody mentioned in the reviews. Problem was that there was 6 people that could stay there, but there was only a sofa for 2 people.
Okay.
Another problem was that there was only 1 coffee cup for 6 people, and there were 3 forks and 4 knives. Now, if you're going to have dinner or coffee or sit at the sofa with 6 people, you're going to have a bad time. Yeah. And when Airbnb asks you the questions for the reviews, there's no question about the number of sofa spaces. Basically, people are just going to be unhappy and they're going to say, oh, it was too loud, or location was bad, or there wasn't enough toilet paper. So I think it's really important to actually experience yourself and talk to people rather than just looking at data. Data is, of course, very important too, but it needs to be complemented with real one-on-one interviews.
It makes sense. Yeah, that would be really crappy to make coffee in the morning and having to pass a cup around for 6 people. I just want to kind of transition a little bit to the community part of building the business. And for me, I think it's really speaking with other users, just other vacation. I luckily have this opportunity to talk to a lot of different vacation rental operators, and everyone uses different platforms, and we all get ideas from each other and feedback. What's good? What do you like about yours? What do you like about that? And then obviously different use cases and different pain points. Maybe talk about how, in addition to the product, and as you dial that in, building the community around Hostaway, right? Building a community around the product where you have people that you're talking to your customers have good feedback. Has that been a focus along the growth of the company?
It absolutely has since day one, and we don't have our user conference ready just yet, but it's in the works.
Okay.
But one of the advantages that we had, so first of all, when we set out building the software, we had a clean plate. We had nothing to start with, so we could build whatever we wanted. And once again, compare this to most of the other companies at the time that had built the software for their own needs, and then they needed to sell that software to others, which sometimes can be like a square peg in a round hole. Whereas in our case, we could shape it any way we wanted because there was no predefined shape. So even before we started, we were talking to our customers even before we had a product. We just put up a website and a lead generator, a form, and just started talking to people. And we said, we can offer you, I think we called it Airbnb management tools or Airbnb management software. That was the first iteration on week 1 and 2. But just from that, we found out that there's a wild array of things that people need the platform to do.
Yeah.
And then we started building on that and reiterating on it. And now, finally, this month, we're releasing what I have been doing myself. So I have done pretty much every job in the company except for coding because I don't know how. We have access to all this data, and we can help our property managers to help them improve their business because we have the data. We know what the ADRs in the area are, but we can also see things that are very hard to see outside the box. For example, what if your pictures are not good enough compared to your competition?
Interesting.
What if your reviews speak a clear language with an easy problem to fix? And we actually just ran a project where we took all the properties on Verbo that our users have, and we looked at them and we picked out all of those that are not getting any bookings. And then we segmented that into which ones should get bookings. For example, if you're in an area where Verbo gets a lot of bookings, you should get bookings. And then we looked at them and we found that about half of them, they didn't have the amenities. They were beachfront properties, but they didn't have the checkbox on beachfront. So when a guest goes and searches for a beachfront property, they can't find your property. Of course, you're going to get 0 bookings. So that was our first customer success project that we ran, and it was extremely successful. Over half of these properties within 3 months got their first booking that they never had a booking before, just because the users didn't realize that you need this thing or that thing is what the guests are looking for. So we're going to be running more of these, that because there's such a big user pool that we are proactively going to reach out to users and help them make more money.
Yeah, that'd be great. That would definitely help with the stickiness. I would love that. We want to do more Verbo business. We actually talk with our market manager all the time. And to be fair, not great. She tries, but it's not super helpful. It doesn't move the needle. We implement their ideas. It doesn't really move the needle. So I would love, that's a great that you're doing that for the users. I think will really, or for your customers. For us, right? I think speaking as the users, whatever platform can help us make the most money and in the most efficient way. I think at least for me, that's how I think about it. OTA distribution, like that is first and foremost what I care about, is like how broad can you get my inventory across and how easy it is to integrate. And because if you're like just really good on one thing and you have all the bells and whistles in the back, if I'm just on Airbnb, it's helpful, but not super useful. So it's really good. Just glad to hear that you're prioritizing that. And then if there's another layer on the analytics side that can help us make our properties better or price better, or the length of stay restrictions. Of course, there's AirDNA and Transparent and all the other providers that have the data. But fundamentally, first party data on a PMS that can see everything, has enough of data to give you some real insights. That's gonna be much more valuable because for me, that would be much more. I'd be much more willing to trust that data from my PMS system than scrape data from AirDNA, because you don't really know. I'm sure they do. I know they do a good job, but fundamentally, it's still scrape data, right? But you actually have real book data from your user base and being able to collect that to actual insights. I think that's just a different level of accuracy and fidelity to data that personally I would find, and I think most of my peers would find much more valuable. It's like key data. I think they do a good job because they actually have the data from the first party. Like first party data is always better than third-party data. So it's great that's great that you're doing
another
that.
Example is direct bookings. A lot of people want to get direct bookings, and it's worth understanding that for some locations you simply can't expect that. Because if you got places in New York, you're not going to get direct bookings, because if you just Google New York, you're going to find a billion websites.
Right.
Like everyone's taken that.
Yeah.
But if you got a small lake somewhere where your grandma grew up and there's 5 cottages, that Google the name of that lake and I guarantee you, you won't find a billion websites. That's when you can get direct bookings.
Interesting.
But yeah, I actually, yeah, so I'm very happy about the customer success team that we get to roll it out now. I got the idea when I spoke to one of our customers who was really honest. He said, look, business isn't doing well. And it was financial problems.
Yep.
So we went and looked at it, and the photos were all great. He got great reviews and actually great properties in great locations. And they were rented out. So that wasn't the problem. So then I asked, okay, how is this not working? And he said, look at this. After all these expenses, there's no money left. So what we actually found out was that he wasn't paying out he was on a revenue share model, so he was property manager, but he wasn't paying out the owners based on the gross nightly rate. He was paying it out based on the payout, which meant that he had to pay all the expenses himself.
Yeah.
And this was quite remarkable because these were very high-end properties. So he had a profit of 1,000 a month on massive turnover. And once we noticed that he had just forgotten to think about, okay, how does he make money? Because he was so focused on making the owners money by having the right photos, right description, and so on. We together with him, we checked his agreements that he had with the owners, and it was clearly defined how he should divide the expenses. And he had just done it wrong for many years, even before he was our customer. So once we fixed that, his profitability went from 1,000 a month to 5,000 a month, just by a few clicks in the system. And he never realized that.
Yeah.
And he's still following the exact contract that he has signed. And it's just amazing. That's when I think you need a third party, someone else outside to just review your business and make sure you're doing well and reach out. That's what a partner means. That if you don't know if you could do better, then just you can reach out to someone. And that's,
having that community around.
Hostaway.
Yeah, no, I think a user conference would be fantastic to just for my perspective, like just meeting other users and just hearing what other people are doing in a structured way would be great. So I'll definitely look out for that. I do want to, one other point I want to hit on is just tell us a little bit about how you think about scaling. Post-COVID, we've had this huge travel boom, and I think a lot of us that have survived that, people are trying to figure out how to scale their business. And obviously, your business is different from my business, but just like any, but you've built a very successful organization now, but maybe one or two takeaways from that journey on how do you scale in a responsible way where you have a sustainable platform to grow. That'd be great to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, there's one thing that I can share that I certainly see in property managers as well. And this is a bit, I call it the symptom, the grass is greener. People always think that it was better before, or it's going to be better in the future, or it's better somewhere else. But what I learned there is that when you're going through a hard time, that's when you really should look at it as what it is you're doing and try to assign metrics to it, try to assign numbers to it. Whether it's your customer reviews, whether it's your ADRs, your occupancy rates, whether it's your profit margin. Just put a number on that and start tracking that. Because if you have a market where things are either going extremely well, for example, right now, vacation rentals are doing really well. But that's going to end at one point. And there are downsides to things going well. Right now, things are going well, but that means everyone's getting in. So suddenly you have a lot of, let's say, people who don't have experience, they're unprofessional, they might be breaking the rules, they might be renting out places too low. And if you've been around for 10 years, you're going to complain about that. But that's actually not bad, because what that means is that as long as you follow your business and you're doing the things the right way, and you're aware that these others are not, the moment we hit even a little bit of headwind, they're going to die out like flies. And guess what's going to happen to the demand of your services at that moment? They're going to skyrocket. And that's exactly what we did during COVID. Yes, in broad terms, we laid the direction and so on. But what we really did was we focused internally as well. What is it that we're doing well, and how do we put that in numbers, and how can we make sure that it stays good? And what are we doing really badly compared to everyone else? How can we put that in numbers, and how can we improve it? And that's something that we keep doing over and over again, and something that really helps. But keep in mind that if, the business is good or the business is bad, it helps you either way to just have the numbers,
Have the numbers,
because
yeah.
your competitors are not going to have those. They're not going to have those in place, and you will have a way to run your business when things change, and that's when you can take control of an entire market.
Absolutely. It's like it's you can't manage what you don't measure. And it's back to the point about just having good data and being able to analyze, put numbers and metrics behind things. And that's how you are going to measure if what you're doing is successful or not. It's funny actually you said that. It's right before COVID, we had 10 properties in one location, and a huge competitor moved right next door to us. And we looked at the pricing, we're just like, and it's a nicer building. We're like, I don't know how they're charging half of what we're charging. And I know our costs are lower. And we're just like, this could be bad, right? Because they're gonna eventually they're gonna kill us because they have a better product and it's half the price. So like, why wouldn't someone stay there? And that was January of 2020. And I remember seeing that, and we're like, let's keep doing. We can't price that way because we're not going to make any money. So what's the point of doing this business if we can't do that? And we're just like, look, we're going to run it. We're going to run our business the way that we were going to run it, and then follow chips when they may. And March happened, and then they went bankrupt in April. And then it was funny. We were in the process to buy some of their assets, and I got the model, and I looked at it, and I looked at that property, and I was like, oh my God, like how much money are they losing here? Obviously, it was a venture model back in 2020, but it was funny actually, like lifting the cover. So it is another thing too. Is if you got to be confident in what you're doing too, right? If you're doing something and you have the numbers around it, and like you're seeing some like irrationality in the market, don't always think, oh man, like what am I missing? Am I doing something wrong? Most likely you're doing something right, and it's just they're doing something wrong, and you have to just be true to what you're doing, and eventually that situation will correct itself. Maybe not all the time, but like eventually, like just if you're selling something unprofitably for a long period of time, like eventually you're gonna run out of money because that's just like this is capitalist society. It's just the law of numbers. But it's funny you mentioned that it jogged that memory.
Exactly. And that's another thing that being said, it's really good to be confident, but at the same time, always double check. Whenever one of my teams asks me a question, then I give an answer, but I always put a disclaimer there and I say, hey, if you disagree, let me know, because I might be right today and I have been right for 7 years in a row now. There's going to be a day when I'm wrong. So just let me know. And we had a customer who had just bought 3 fantastic vacation rental properties in a very expensive area called Big Bear, California. And after just a few months, she came and said, I can't afford to use Hostaway. And we looked at those properties and they were charging $500 a night. But then we looked at the competing properties and they were charging $1,000 a night. So we thought, that's very strange. How come they don't have any money? And we started looking deeper. Turns out nobody was booking them because they have taken really bad photos after sunset with an old iPhone.
Yeah. Well,
And every other property had professional photos taken during daylight hours. So of course nobody's going to book that. And we tried to hint, because we can't really tell a customer, sorry, you can't rent out poor iPhone photos for $1,000 a night. But we tried to hint it in that direction. And they said, no, our problem definitely is the PMS.
okay.
And then we let them go. And it's good to be confident, but do accept other people's opinions, or at least go out and ask and be humble. Hey, am I doing this right? Because chances are, to be a property manager, you need so many different skills.
You really do.
And I have yet to meet a property manager that has a degree in accounting, in hospitality, in communications, in marketing, and in sales. Nobody has that.
Yeah. No, yeah. That's the fun part. And as we wind down this conversation, that's the kind of the fun part of this industry is, you're right, there is no short-term rental vacation management degree out there that you learn all these like different skills. We all come from it from a different, background. Like a lot of my peers, like some come from hospitality, but like I come from a finance background, some come from design, just everything. And everyone's developed their own system in the way that they've done it. And then you just learn from each other. This is a good idea. I'm going to borrow this, or and just getting feedback. And then just going back to that community point. Surround yourself with people that are doing what you're doing and ask for help. That's a good way to just solicit feedback. And it's okay to make a mistake. Just don't continue to make a mistake, especially when you know it's wrong and you just bang your head against a problem that, there's a solution, but they don't see it or just or don't want to, right? And having someone with some experience to tell you that, hey, there's a better way of doing this. Maybe to execute that. And that I found to be a big driver for success. Look, I guess final question. Business is a team sport, right? You've started multiple businesses in your background, in your experience. We're not here alone, and it takes a team to get us to where we want to be. What's one of the kindest things that someone's done for you along this journey that's really helped you get to where you are today?
There's definitely right. It is a team sport, and it's not always obvious either who's leading the team, because, well, I found out this weekend about the super chicken model. For those of you who are interested in science or in managing a business or managing maybe a sports team, check out the super chicken model where everything went horribly wrong. But the nicest thing someone has done to me was actually during COVID. It was one of our customer success managers said, "Thank you," to me. And that, as a founder and CEO, those are two words you don't hear a lot, because nobody thanks you. But I asked, "Okay, what are you thanking me for?" And she said, "Thank you for talking to all these customers and trying to save our business. We're all in the same boat together, and you're taking the biggest hits here. So thank you for that." And I thought that's one of the most kind things anyone has ever done to me. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's just the satisfaction of, for us, just like your team, being the leader of the business, but you're leading a team and seeing them thrive and appreciation and them being able to hit their personal, financial, family goals is, I think, one of the parts of business people don't talk about enough. I think for us, like, we have teams that are offshore, and seeing them like being able to buy houses, build houses, or support their families from this business. And then kudos to the property management system, right? Because it's what allows us to offshore. It's what makes this model work, right? Like, we can't afford $15 an hour labor here in the US for customer services. Like, we need to be able to go offshore, and we need a technology platform to do that and do it in an efficient way. And I think this is one of the things where this industry is great. The owners, the managers, we're building a nice business, but we're able to also support our ecosystem, our respective ecosystems. Thank you for sharing that, and really congratulations on building a great product. Really enjoyed this conversation, and best of luck going forward. And we're obviously pulling for Hostaway.
Thank you very much for your support and for being a customer and for having us here.